All right, so let's keep going on the requirements. So we left off, I just read the email that kind of listed off what the team was looking for. It's a charity auction, and we're going to build a basic application to help with the management of it. And then one of my little twins threw up all over herself, and I needed to deal with that. And then the other one threw up on me. So a couple hours later, and it's back to it. So I'm going to share this on Twitter, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so we reviewed this email, and just to sort of refresh everyone's memory just for a second, I got this email from the group that I am working with, and it basically outlined 9 things that they've needed in the past. The group was thinking about using using Excel and Access as they've done before, but there have been problems, and they articulated what they want. So I thought this seemed like an interesting subject for us to build something on. Okay, so that's that email. So let's get into a couple of documents that they also shared that I think are interesting. So the first one is going to be, let's see, the form that they'd like to use to collect donation items. So I'll share that, and we'll go through that. Okay. Great. Okay, so I got these all today. So I haven't done any planning about how we're going to attack this design. So we're just going to do it live. we'll do it live. All right, so let's go through this document. So it's a service auction. The idea is that people in the community donate their it may be goods, or usually services, or maybe use of a vacation house, something like that they have. And then other people bid on it. And the idea is to raise money by the community giving the things that they have. So this is a real event. It's coming up on November 14th. This is exactly what I received, minus I just blacked out some of the details just to avoid that sort of leaking into to this discussion. So let's just sort of walk through it. Okay, so we've got an item number. Let's just refer to, during the event. This is a live event, kind of like a dinner and drinks thing where people come and bid on things. So need an item. We'll keep that in mind. Got donor name, phone, email, address. So, this idea of a donor, we're going to have to think about that. Do we want to have that be a model, or do we have user as a model, and a user could be a donor? And then, having various contact methods like phone, email, address, that seems like a thing for that user model too. But we'll just sort of walk through all the info that we have and then make some of those decisions in a little bit. Okay, so we've got this donor section that feels like its own thing. Then we've got some information about the donation itself. So we've got a title and description. We'll see how these get used a little bit later. Quantity offered. Okay, that's an interesting idea. So the idea that there's sort of a variable quantity, that's something we're going to want to think through. Maybe we'll support that, maybe we won't. Can we offer more if there's more demand? Okay, so this sort of feels like something that could bite us if we don't get right. So the idea that there's a sort of a number of units of the item, and then when someone's bidding, they could bid for a units, then maybe could have multiple bids win for a given donation, and then it would take off the unit. So it's interesting. It's why having forms like this are helpful, because I'm not sure if that's something I would have thought of for this charity auction management system if I hadn't seen it there. Okay, so we've got that. All right, some date ranges for the use of the auction. Estimated value, it's pretty straightforward. Minimum bid if necessary. Yeah, that makes sense. So idea is that you want the bid to be high enough, or else it may not be worth it for you to spend your time doing something. And we'll get to some examples in a second that makes sense, I think, for that. What can we display at the auction? Yeah, okay, so there are like tables set up around the room, and we want to have things to display. So, okay, that's a good idea. And then some categorization for, okay, that's interesting. We'll have categories, and think about how we do that. Any follow-up? Okay. Now let's just look at the rest here. So Okay, so there's a due date here, and the due date sort of points to an obvious model that's needed, but you see there's a need sort of for this idea of the auction itself to be a model, which is pretty obvious. Okay, so let's just sort of go through the things that we see here, and I'll make. I'm not going to make notes yet. Let's just go through what we see. So we've got one model, which is the idea of the auction. We've got things like when it is, what the deadline is for submitting items into the auction book, perhaps where it is. I mean, that's blacked out here, but we'd need that information. So at the minimum, we've got just a handful of, or less than a handful of attributes about this auction model. And maybe I will make a little note here as I'm going through. So models. Auction. Okay, so we've got auction. And then I think that the second thing I see is that we've got a donor. And I know from reading some other things back in that email that we looked at that we're going to want to also have bidders, right? So, and we're going to have administrators. And these are all, I think, really what's going on is we've got users, and the users can play various roles as it relates to different things. Like a user could be the donor, they could be the buyer, they could be both for that matter. So I'm going to mark that down, that I see that we need a user, and I'll get back to that. So then we've got donation, right? So that seems pretty straightforward as another model. So donation. Yeah, I think we saw some interesting things about this quantity idea, but I think that's going to be as simple as just keeping, maybe an attribute on the donation. Okay. I think we don't have to get in, well, I'm going to put it down. It's this minimum bid. I mean, this sort of suggests that there are bids. So I'm going to write that down as a model. Now, I think that's interesting to think about. So there are minimum bids, which sort of suggests that, maybe you could just have one bid as long as it met the minimum. But back in the email that we read, there are multiple types of auctions, including silent auctions and live auctions. And in those auctions, there could be multiple bids per item. So I think this idea of bid is probably the right model. And then we'll have, winning bid is the purchase, and maybe we could have multiple winning bids with this quantity idea. So some fun things to model there. That sounds interesting. Let's see, do we have anything else? No, I think that's about it. So we've got auction, user, donation, and bid as the core models that I'm seeing that we need to manage. Okay, so maybe what we'll do is just take a look at the other documents that were shared and see if they tell us anything, and then we'll go and actually sort of bullet out what some of these specific requirements are. Okay, so let's do that. So I've got a couple of other documents to look at. I think that they were, let's see, one which is like the auction booklet. Let's take a look at that. And the other was just like a listing of all of the items that's sort of serves a similar purpose. Okay, so I'm going to share this auction booklet. So, this isn't, there's nothing too interesting technical about this, except I just like to sort of wade through what the end goal is going to be on a project, and just to get a feel for maybe some of the requirements that I wouldn't have thought of myself. Okay, so what do we see here? So we've got the item and the title and the description and the estimated value. These are all things before. I think we do see that there's a need for formatting, right? We've got like an underlined, a bunch of underlines. You can imagine bold or color even, or, maybe not color, but certainly underline and bold and italics. So that suggests to me maybe we're going to want to just plan for something in Markdown or some other sort of plain text format or simple format we can render into styled text. So we'll keep that in mind. And then, the idea that you may want this printed out, that makes sense. So, when we build the client, we'll think about that idea. Okay, so I think that's what we can learn from that. And then the only other document we have is this auction items listing. So let me share that. And then I think we'll have enough to sort of bullet out our basic requirements to start. Okay, so this is a spreadsheet, and you can see that we just have the list of the items, and I think that this looks like the title. It says description, but it's got the title and then maybe the value range, who donated. I just blacked that out to keep the info private. And then what the winning bid was. Okay, so this was sort of an output after the event to see what the outcome was and get an idea of kind of a summary. I don't think I learned anything really new from this. So I'm going to close that. All right, so we read that email. Again, it was that 9-point email. That had a lot of details, and we'll cover those in a second. We got an idea of the form. I think that probably taught us the most, and then we saw the other two documents. And when I'm going through and building an application, I try to do this first, which is like gather as much information as I can without even stressing about writing anything down or too much, just so I have a full idea of what's going on. And what's going on here is pretty straightforward, right? So we've got an auction. That auction is going to have items that are donated. Those donated items are going to have bids on them. Some of those bids will win, some won't. We've got to keep track of how many can win based on the quantity, and whether or not those can win based on the minimum bid requirements. We've got various pieces of information we've got to collect to repurpose into both printed and digital form. So it's a pretty good feel for what we need to do. I don't think we have to stress about all of the details too much, but what I'd like to do now is I'm going to take that form, which I think had the most information. I'm going to set it on the one side of my screen. Then I'm going to take a little just notepad for now, and then we're going to actually pull out the individual requirements. We'll do that live. I think it's an interesting process. It's the sort of thing I would do, and maybe it'd help you in some sort of way. So I'm going to share my whole screen this time, and then I'll arrange. Okay. So I'm going to arrange my screen then. Let's see. So on the one side, let me put the donation form. I think that was the most helpful to start with. And on the other side, I'm going to put that notepad that I had started to take some notes on the side. Okay. So we have these models, right? We've got auction, user, donation, and bid. And I think that that's all we need for now. We'll need some more later, I think, but these are the core. And if something pops up, we're going to, we'll just come and add it later. So what we're going to do is just make a note in my notepad. And then once we've got a basic sort of punch list of the first set of things to do, we're going to take that list and then we'll go to GitHub and we'll actually build, we'll actually go and build out the GitHub issues, I think, for these items to start with. But we're not going to do that this episode. This episode, where the idea is just to sort of complete this notepad. Okay, so we've got a model. We said the first one is for the auction. Let's just grab some of the attributes. So we've got the auction start time and probably end time. So I'm going to say starts at, ends at. Now, we don't explicitly see that in this document, but it's, it's obvious that we're going to have a start time, have to have an end time. We'll probably need a time zone. As a rule of thumb, I never store any dates or any times in anything but UTC, just because it's bit me 100% of the time that I ever did that. So we're going to add time zone then. Okay, so time zone. Never remember if that's got the underscore or not. I think it does. All right, so we've got time zone. We'll just store the string for that. It's going to need an address, maybe a name, and then this is the only one I hadn't really thought of beforehand, which is this idea that there's a donation, a time at which the donations must be received by. So what should we call that? We'll call that like, donation window ends at. All right, so, you know, and it's not like I think that these, it's critical to get these names right, but you know, what the heck, the names matter, and I think that might as well try in the first place. So I think that covers the auction pretty well. You know, when we'll come up with other needs later, but this is fine for now. Okay, so user. Now again, we've got this. I'm kind of jumping ahead and maybe extracting this too early, but I'm pretty confident from the email we read we're going to need to. So the user, we're going to have a name, a phone, name, phone number. Now it's interesting. I mean, about what kind of phone number. I think ideally we're going to say mobile phone number because we may want to be able to text people. And that's an interesting feature, I think, in particular for an auction where sort of immediate communication may be helpful. So I'm going to specify it that way. Then I've got email address and then street address, or we'll call this physical address. Okay. Now, do we see anything else about user? No, I think that's all for now. I think we're probably going to have some idea of like whether or not you're an admin, and that'll give extra roles, but I'm going to punt on things authorization and even authentication centric for now. So for now, we're not going to have that. We're just going to have users be sort of a regular old model without any special powers. Okay. So now we've got the donation itself, and you know, this is a relatively fat model, I think. So let's go through it. So we've got the title, which is here. We've got the description. Okay, so we've got quantity offered. So I think that this is really the maximum quantity. Right, because I think this question is a little bit weird. Can you offer more if there's demand? So I think that may be sort of over designing it. I'm not going to actually try to build that idea in, but I will put this idea of quantity. Right. So and I don't even think we need maximum. I think that there's an idea of what quantity are you donating, and then however many bids are awarded to will sort of dictate how many you actually were fulfilled. I think that that's how I want to do it. So let's do that. So we've got quantity. We're going to skip this guy. Dates to use donation. Okay, so we can sort of simplify this idea and say something like, what's the earliest date of use and what's the latest date of use? And you know, does that cover all cases? Well, maybe not. I mean, I think you could come up with ideas like, well, maybe you need multiple date ranges, but I also think you could make that multiple donations. So I think that we're just going to have two dates then, like the earliest date and the latest date. So we'll have, let's call it this, valid after and a valid before. You know, those are the two. You know, but so I'm actually going to change this. In the past, I've named attributes similar to this like this, but sometimes I find after and before to be a little bit hard to read. Like you sort of don't think about it quite right. And I tend to like having date stamps end in at. Not always, but often. So maybe we can have like, you know, use window starts at, and or maybe just window starts at and window ends at. Okay. You know, I'm not positive that I like that. And anytime I see like a repetition in a prefix like this, or like a name spacing of the attribute, that tends to suggest that there may be a model that you want to add to, like a window model in this example. And you know, maybe that's true, because we've got now two windows. We've got the donation window and we've got the auction window. But I'm not going to do it that way for now. I think it's an interesting thing to think through, but let's just keep these a little more simple for now. There may be a little bit of repetition, but no big deal. Okay, let's keep going through. So we've got that. We've got estimated value. Now, I am going to put the units in here. So estimated value dollars, right? So that indicates that it's going to be sort of whole dollars. I think that's probably the right resolution for this kind of idea. So let's do that. And there aren't any hard and right answers on this. I mean, maybe someone would disagree with that choice, but I'm going to do an integer that's dollars, and that's fine. Minimum bid. Okay, so we will do that. Minimum bid dollars. Okay, then we've got the display description. Now, this is one where I think it may be interesting if you had like selectable items, but I think we'll just have that be just text. That's fine. All right. Now this is interesting. So how would you categorize your donation? Now, I think that this is one where we probably want to add this model in, right? So I am going to go back up here and add a donation category. And we'll just have a name for that. I think that that's going to be kind of clean to do it, and you can just know that we're going to want to have additional categories added, and that this probably should be a first class model. Now again, someone could think that's over designing this. Perhaps this should be a enum or whatever, but you could also imagine something, maybe you could have multiple categories. So let's just go through the hassle to make this a first class model. I know in my apps that I actually build professionally, I usually err on that side of extracting out sort of the thing into its own model, even if I think it may be a good idea. So I'm going to do that here. Now, we know that we need a bid, but so I know I need this model, but I am going to punt on that for now, because I think we need a little bit more information. If we go back to our email, let's take a look at that just to see if that gives us any more ideas. Yeah, and it does. So let's add some of these back in. And again, this is very much how I approach things, right? I like first do a flyover, then I get a good idea of sort of what the basic lay of the land is. Then I just go through and like literally check off from a document like this every single little thing that I see. Oh, like follow-up needed. I just saw that as I'm saying this. So this is on the donation. This would be like, admin follow up needed. Okay, so we've got that. Now, I mean, that also suggests that we may need something like, has there been follow-up, like track that idea. But for now, I'll not add that. But anyway, so I've gone through this form. I think I've grabbed all of the items. I mean, maybe an item number, we may want to actually specify that instead of using the ID, but for now we can just use the ID. I think that's fine. Not a big deal to switch to later. I always see this for questions, contact the auction chair. That's kind of interesting. So yeah, let's think about that. So, perhaps we have something like then, maybe like an auction admin model, which is a join between the auction and the user, and I'm going to put a question mark next to that because I'm not positive about that yet, but I suspect we are going to have something like that. So, and anytime I have a belongs to, like, if this says contact the auction chair, I almost always ask myself, should I go with a has many instead of that to one relationship? Like, is it possible I'd need multiple? And if so, build a join model like auction admin, go with it that way. Okay. So let's keep looking, see if we missed anything else. I think that's probably good for this one. Now, you may see things like this, like date to use the auction and these ranges. I think that there's an important idea here, which is when we get to building the interface, we can still express this idea of the form using this kind of backend model. So, you know, you want to, I think you want to be careful to design a model that'll work for this form and then other versions of the form. So don't one-to-one it, but think about what it implies is needed for the future without getting too ahead of yourself. So I'm going to close that, and then let's go through that email. Okay, so see what we've covered. So we've got item number again. I think that there's a question about, do we want to be able to set the number? But for now, I'm just going to have that be the ID. You know what? No. We've seen it multiple times now. It's not by mistake. I'm going to add this in. So into our donation, we're going to add a item number. It may be that when it comes to arranging the items for print, we may want to do it in a different way than this is the database ID or alphabetical, or we may want to have an explicit way to number this. So I'm gonna say we're gonna go with item number as an explicit attribute, and we can always revisit. Okay, title, description, we had that. Now takeaway of certificate or actual item, that's something that we did not record off of that other sheet. So that's interesting. We're going to want to make sure that that gets in here. So that'll be on the donation. Now, that's interesting. So this says, can the person leave with the thing that they bought, or do they get a certificate? I think that we're going to make this an enum, right? Which is like be the various, the types that you can leave with, but I think it's a little bit more explicit when you read the code and go with a Boolean. Plus, in the case that we were wrong and it ended up that there were other types besides, like, can you take it? Yes, no, we'll have the flexibility to add them. So let's see. How do we'll call this fulfillment type. Just gonna make a note to myself that's an enum. Now we've got minimum bid, I think already covered. We've got the donor. Now I didn't actually make a note of that here, so we're gonna add that, donor. We've got the contact information for the donor, which again, donor is a user, so that's covered that way. Type of auction, live, silent, or teacup raffle. Okay, so what this says is how is this going to be bid on? Now, is it going to be like a live auctioneer driven auction? Is it going to be a silent auction, which is like a piece of paper at the table that you write in your bid and then the highest one wins? Or is it going to be a teacup raffle where basically you get raffle tickets based on donating a certain amount of money, and then you divvy up your raffle tickets into these little teacups or whatever in front of the items, and then there's a drawing, and then whoever's raffle ticket is chosen per item gets it. So a couple things this says. So one, we need this idea of auction type. Now that also sort of makes me wonder, is this a enum that we want to have, or is it actually a model that we want to create a relationship to? I think that it's a model, because I think that you could imagine for someone that's going to come to an event like this, they may need to look at a page that describes like a type of auction or history of the auction or an example of that item at auction or whatever. And if we don't have, I think it's easier to do that with a model. Plus, if there's a 4th or 5th or 10th type of auction, I find it nice to have a model we can build onto in a first-class way. So I'm going to go over here and make a note of that then and say, okay, this is now, so what I'm reading here is auction type. So I think there's a question about, do we want to actually call this auction type, or do we want to call this like bid type? I think bid type is probably a better name, because the idea is that there's going to be bids on a given auction, and having those bids be I think that bid type is more descriptive, I think more accurate. So bid type, and then we'll have, for now, just something like name. And we may, this may get a life of its own. You could imagine an online bid or some such thing, may, we could end up doing much more of this in the future, but for now, it's just going to be bid type with a name, very much like donation category with a name, and maybe it gets more to it later. So then the donation itself would be assigned to a bid type. Okay. So let's keep going through. So I think that covers the donation now. We got that. Okay, this is fine. So, okay, this is purchases. So this is the first, the thing that we see that's going to help us build out our bid requirements. So it says that a bid is going to need, it's going to have a purchaser. Now, purchaser seems a little bit weird given that we're calling it a bid. So we're going to call this a bidder, right? So that's the user that's making the bid. And then some bids win and some that don't, or some don't. And the ones that win are the ones that are purchased. So I think this is how I'd model that. And then what else do we have here? There's going to be an amount. So this is amount dollars. Now, I know it doesn't read perfect to call this amount dollars, and I think that it's sort of a Ruby thing to not like to have attributes that read this way, but I've always found that when you're dealing with something that has is in a unit of measure, to just put the unit of measure on the back of the attribute always. And if you hesitate about doing that, it may mean that there's sort of a flexible unit of measure, in which case you're going to have two attributes. So that's why I put it on the end. Doesn't mean we have to call it that in the interface. We're just going to call it that in our model to be nice and explicit. Okay, what else do we have? Now, we had this idea before of quantity, right? So if we've got the quantity on a donation, we need to have a quantity on the bid. And then obviously the bid needs to be connected to a donation too. What else do we have? So I think that covers those. Now, okay, so we see this here, which is how paid. Now, that sort of suggests that we have another model here, which is payment. I believe it's out of scope for what we're working on right now, but I'm going to put it here just to, at least we got a place to sort of record how payment was made. And then just, we'll say method, and amount dollars. And it could be that, this is going to be user too. It could be that one payment gets applied to multiple bids, and that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to build this out, because having built similar things before, I know it gets a little bit more involved. So I'm just going to put payment here. We can stub it, and maybe we'll deal, or this will remind us to come back later. Okay, I think that covers number 4. These two are fine. Now, what I just read at the end of the evening, it reminded me that time is a thing. So we're going to want to put, placed at. For the bid. Just so we have a record of when things were, so we could reconstruct order, which could be important for something like a silent auction or a forward auction, an online forward auction. Okay, so we've got this. I think we've covered that. We've got a record for each donor of the donation, estimated value, purchaser's name. We've got that. Running total, we could project through the night. We've got that. Oh, and the donation gets related to an auction, right? Because otherwise we couldn't do a running total of the purchases for a given event. Okay, so let's just sort of take a look through, and I think that this covers it. We've extracted sort of out from this email and a couple documents what we need to do. So the top level, we've got an auction, right? Auction's got the time and the place, the time zone, and the name. When the donation window ends, nice and straightforward. We'll probably start by building this one. And then just for kind of to get our feet wet, we'll make a simple interface to edit it too. All right, so we've got that. We've got users. We're skipping over auth and authorization and authentication for now, which is the idea that that there are users, and that means like it's a person that can use the system. I think that's even a reasonable alternative name for this. I'll call it user. We've got, we kind of need those two in the first place, and then after that we've got a couple of kind of helper models that we'll probably just seed the database with to start with and not worry about having like an interface for the admin to deal with them to begin with. So bid type and donation category, and I frequently have models like this. And then we've got the big one, which is the donation, which is that one that has the form. And then we've got bids, which we'll get to later, but kind of skip for now. So I think I'd basically group this into, we've got auctions, right? We've got user, which at first will just have sort of authless use and make users, and then eventually we'll have a connection between who's using the app and the actual user table or model. We've got these two, which are kind of these background and then donation. So I'd group it into 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, areas. Maybe we can start even with bid type and donation category, that or auction. Okay, so I think that sort of covers this. So our next step is going to be to take this list and then build the GitHub issues with it, and then we can go ahead and start building our server to handle this. All right, so let me switch back here. All right, so that kind of takes you through. I'm not sure how long we went for, probably 25 minutes, and maybe I should record all of my programming or my work about programming, because I think I was just more thorough than I would usually be in my day-to-day work. But when I'm doing it right, this is how I do it. We've got a list now, a document. We can then take that, translate that into a basic outline in GitHub, and we'll build that next. So next time will either be GitHub, or maybe I'll just do that now. And then from there, we'll move on to building the server. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep this live just because why not? And I'm gonna take this and create the list, or take the list we just were looking at, and then create a GitHub repo for the server, and then just make a couple issues. Feel free to stick around. I'll probably keep talking just in case it's ever of use to have this around. But the real meat will be next when we start building our Rails app. All right. So I'm going to make the code for this project open source, public, so you can take a look at it. So I'm going to switch over, and you can just watch me do that. All right, so I'm going to make a repository in GitHub here. I'll call this charity auction, let's see, server. Now we're going to go API first in this design. So I'm going to make a server, and then I'll have a web client for this in a little bit. Just a little detail here. So when I name things, right, if the charity auction is really the name of the thing, and then so I use an underscore, just as I would if I was sort of naming an attribute in Ruby. And then that ends up being sort of a namespace for the type of apps, which is, I use the dash after a namespace, and this is going to be the server side of charity auction. That tends to be how I name things, and so I usually have like, app name dash server and app name dash web, and then maybe app name dash, iOS or whatever else you're gonna, write a client for. Okay, so I'll say Rails, let's see, Ruby on Rails, JSON API compliant server, let's see, to host charity auctions. Okay. All right, so we've got that. So our next step is going to be to create the issues. So I think we create an issue per model for now, and then take those bullets and just make them into little checkboxes in our model or in our issues. Okay, so the first one we had, I'll just paste these over, was auction. All right, so create auction model. So, and then use my text editor here to help me reformat these because they're indented and I don't want that. All right. All right, so now we've got one bullet per, and then it'd be nice if we had this sort of the same helpers, but that's good enough. Okay, so now we've got these. These are our attributes. Okay, now I'm just going to make some notes for myself about what each of these are, right? Just because why not? So this is, you know, date time in UTC. So the date time in UTC also. This will just be the, you know, string representing the time zone of the dates. You know, address, I've done all sorts of things on addresses, but for this one, this is just going to be a text, you know, that can have basically anything whatsoever in it. Name, string, and then donation window ends at will be date, time, and UTC. Okay. So that seems good. Make this a little tiny bit prettier. Just because you're watching, why not? Okay. Now, I think we're just going to focus on the models to start with, and then we'll, because I want to, in a sort of, in a different episode, I'll go through how to use JSON API resources and create the resources for the API. So to start with, we'll just use that. We'll do the model. That's fine. Okay, so that seems fine. That seems fine. All right, so we'll sort of create the same basic type of issue for all of the models then. And that'll just give us, you know, when we come back and start to work on this tomorrow, there's a checklist to work from, which I find very helpful. It means that even if I'm tired or not feeling very creative, it's pretty easy to program, and that's a good thing. All right, so let's go through the rest of these. That was auction. Then we had user. So create user model, paste these in. All right, same deal as before. So see if there's anything terribly clever here. So name, that's just text, or that's just string. I don't think we're going to do anything clever with first name, last name. As you all know, that just gets you into trouble. So for now, we're just going to do this. If we want a friendly name later, we can add it, but no big deal for now. So mobile phone number, that's going to be a string 2. You know, I don't have notes about validation. You know, maybe we'll go back and add some validation notes, or maybe we'll sweep through and do validations all once we've got the basics in. I'll probably do them as I add them though. So, you know, but we can come back to that. All right, so we've got email address, which is a string, and then physical address, which is text. Now that's interesting. So you see we've got physical address here. Now back in our auction model, we had the same idea, physical address, and I'm not positive that I called it that. So I'm going to go back and check. All right, so those are named fine. Save that. I'm going to go back to my issues. Yeah, so you see I didn't name it the same. I tend to find that very frustrating when I have the same idea and it's named differently. Now, sometimes when you see like a field that's named, an attribute that's named the same in multiple models, you should ask yourself, does that mean that there should be a separate model called address? And really that trick came up before. So if you ever see kind of a namespace on an attribute, like a prefix that's repeated, that indicates maybe you need a model. And if you ever see just the whole name of the attribute repeated on multiple models, that suggests that maybe you need another model too. But like I said, for now, I'm just going to go plain text because frankly, it doesn't matter all that much for this app. Sometimes geography is a huge issue and you wouldn't want to do that, but I don't think this is an example of that. So I've got those two. Next, let's see. So I had this idea of auction admin, which is the relationship between a user and an auction that would determine kind of who are the people they can go to for who's running the thing. And while I think that sort of has to do with authentication and authorization at least, I think I'm going to add it now though. Because I think even if you didn't have authorization and authentication, I think that idea makes sense. I think that's a thing. So I'm going to add that next. All right. So we'll do create auction admin model. All right, so the auction, that's just a relationship. Then user is a relationship. And then I also think, because we saw it in that document, I'm going to add the idea of a chair. Now this is going to be a Boolean that's unique. Unique Boolean scoped to the let's see, we're gonna have it. Yeah. So it's a Boolean, and we're going to have like only one share per auction. There we go. I'm having trouble this late getting words out. And again, is that super important? I don't know yet, but it was in that document. I think whatever, at least we'll get it listed here and what we need to do. And then we can always decide not to implement it later. Okay. Good. So next, we have the two kind of seeded data reference types, bid type and donation category. So we'll add those now. Create bid type. All right, so in this one, we'll say, okay, attributes, but then I'm also going to make a note of like which ones to seed. So this is seed, and let's go back to that document that we were looking at. The three types were live, silent, auction, silent, and teacup. So I'll just make a note of those. Okay. All right, I think that's all we need to know about bid type for now. We can see from the seed that what it's used for. Maybe I'll make a note because it may not be totally obvious what this is. The other ones were sort of self-explanatory by their name. And this one basically is, especially if you see the seeded data, but we'll say like the, supported types, auction types for bids on a donation. Okay, good. All right, let's go back. Now we've got donation category, same basic deal. Create donation category model. All right, and that had a name, and then on the seeding, we have the list from that document. But I'm gonna punt on actually enumerating all of them and just put a couple of examples, and we can move on. So they were like specialty services, vacation homes, things like that. So specialty services, vacation homes, and then I'll say refer to, and then I think I actually can even drag a file, so that's perfect. Refer to donation form. Okay. And I'm going to drag that file on. All right, so great, so it's got that link, that's what we wanted. Got those guys. Okay, so we've got that category now. I think we only have two left. So the two were donation and bid and payment, but payment we're not going to add yet. Bid I'm even a little reluctant to, but I think we can, it's fine. All right, so let's do donation. That was the biggest one. I'm just going to find and replace, so I don't have to do same deal again. Okay. So we'll create donation model. Oops. Hold on, I didn't find and replace correctly, so there we go. All right, so let's list these attributes, make a few notes about them. So that's string. This is going to be text, markdown. Not that the server needs to know anything about that necessarily. Maybe it does, but not necessarily. But just a note for us. Quantity, integer. Okay. I guess I can put the type of relationship, so that's going to be belongs to. Bid type was it belongs to. All right, so donor. Okay. Window starts at, window ends at. And again, it really bugs me to see this repeated namespace because, it just really feels like you need that model, but I'm just not going to do it for now. All right. And I mean, sometimes I would write more notes about like, should it be present or valid, all the various validations, etc. And perhaps we will, but since it's me working on it, I think it's okay to keep it like this. Okay. So pretty close to done. Now, interestingly, even though it says a number, we saw in the one example that there were strings in some of them, like A, B, C. So we'll make this a string, and that's why it's good to use examples of things in the past. It just points out needs that you just may not have thought of, that aren't any harder to build in the first place, but could be a pain to change to later. And then fulfillment type enum. And again, every time you see this enum, you think, well, should this be a model? But I think in this case, This is just that basically that two option, like, do you get it, is it fulfilled now or later? So I think enum is fine. All right, so I think that's it. So I mean, there are a lot of attributes, obviously, right? So it's like 5, 13 or something, but it's not that complicated of a model. I mean, none of this is all pretty straightforward. So now we've got that, and all that's left is bid, and then we're going to skip payment. So let us add that. I'm just doing myself a favor here and getting the checkboxes in. Okay. So we're going to create bid model. How many times can I get wrong the exact same thing? It's ridiculous. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so the donation is belongs to, bidder is belongs to, that's a user. Dollars integer. And like, I think that this is a reasonable thing to say, well, should we protect against this and go send so that we can handle sub dollar bids? And the answer is like, maybe, but for an auction, you're never going to go below $1 in resolution. So we're just going to keep it at that. Not a big deal to change if we had to, but quantity integer and then placed as date time. Okay. So I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory here. We don't need any other content in that. So let's go back and look. So now I'm going to show you how I organize these then. So all of these are ready to work on right now, right? We could do them in any order. I'm going to make a label, which I always do, which is called ready. And I make ready with green. Okay. And that means that this thing is ready. Like, I mean, it's able to be worked on now. I'm going to clean these up and remove some of the ones that I don't use. So I'm not going to use help wanted. Enhancement, I always think is a weird word. So I'm going to put this as feature. Duplicate, bug, invalid, question won't fix it. Okay. Then if I'm working with multiple people, I sometimes put one that indicates that what I'm working on this second, but for now, I don't think I need that. So all of these are ready to be worked on. So I'm going to mark them as ready. And they also are features. So I'm going to mark them as, oops, didn't mean to do that. So I'm also going to mark them as feature. So they have both of that. So the reason I did that now is because now I can also create an issue for create payment model. And even though it's not ready to work on yet, it's not going to get in the way because I'm not going to have a ready, I'm not going to have the ready attribute on it. So I'm going to mark this here as a feature, but not ready. And then tomorrow when I say, okay, I'm ready to put in an hour's worth of work or whatever to knock out, these models, then I can just say, okay, time to work. Let's filter down to the things that are ready. And then I'll have what I need to work on in front of me. Okay. So let me switch back. All right, so that sort of covered the whole process for now of how I go from the documents that I was sent, and I literally got those earlier today, through to understanding the domain, understanding what I need to do. This was new to me, so this isn't something that I usually work on or anything. And then translating from there to the requirements in just a notepad that I can keep around, and then processing that notepad into a GitHub issue so that we can work on that later. So I think that's it for now. You can see we're not worrying about the interface yet. We'll get there, and I think it's reasonable when people go that direction first, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to first get the server up for these models, and then maybe we'll create then one resource for something like the auction, and then build a web client where we can edit that just to get used to it, and then we'll bang out the rest of the resources to get the sort of basic CRUD functionality done. And then from there, we'll actually get to the various other use cases we need for the documents that are needed for the auction. But that's it for now. Probably keep going tomorrow morning. Thanks.